everyone. Welcome to the 8th interaction session on the course on advanced robotics. My name is Soumya and I am a PMR fellow at IIT Gandhinagar. So this is the 8th week of the lecture that we are covering. And before this, after looking at all the kinematics and dynamics of the robot, we have finally reached to a point where we can do trajectory planning, where we can move to sensors and actuators, right? So, keeping in mind what we had learned about different kinds of sensors and what we had learned about different kind of actuators, today we move to somewhat more number of actuators, be it electric, be it pneumatic, so all those sort of actuators. And after that, we are going to see something on independent joint control. So this is the thing that we are doing, and also today we'll be proceeding with like a MATLAB problem which will basically help us to know how PID controller is actually applied for a robot. So given the robot dynamics, if you are supposed to, let's say if you are having a tour manipulator and then you want to reach a particular angle, what is the way in which you will program the things so that our PID controller can work to reach the desired target. So that's all. We'll start with the questions. Okay. So, yeah. An actuator that can be operated in an open loop is what? So, so an actuator that can be operated in open loop is pneumatic artificial muscle, brushed DC motor, brushless DC motor, or stepper motor. So before going with anything further, can I know what is the difference between brushed DC motor and brushless DC motor? Any idea on this? Just to give you a sort of hint, it is something related to the placement of the things on stator and rotor. Now, if you have any idea, you can say, else I'll tell you. Okay, that's fine. So what happens really in brushed and brushless DC motor? So whenever you are going to make the choice of a motor now for a particular application, we are actually supposed to know that what we should choose. So in brushed DC motor, I don't know why my pen is working like this. So in brushed DC motor, what happens that you are on the stator, your permanent magnets are placed. Okay, your permanent magnets actually help in the alignment of the poles. Then you have multiple poles here which are placed on the rotor in this way. So basically these rotors align according to the permanent magnets that you have on the stator. So these poles align according to direction. For example, if the and it is purely based on what is the polarity of this pole. So it aligns to this and then your motor rotates, right? But what happens in this case? All the poles are present on the rotor. So your rotor becomes heavy. You have carbon brushes here, which actually help in establishing a communication, and then you are able to give a voltage supply, get the current in the windings, and then you are able to, so here there are windings, right? You are able to get the current in the windings and then they move, and hence you are able to rotate the motor. But what happens in brushless DC motor na? It is a bit different. You just have the permanent magnets present over here and all the poles are present over here. So in this way your rotor does not become very heavy, and everything that is done here is due to electronic commutation. Okay. So when there is electronic commutation, you really don't need to use the brushes as we used in the brush DC motor. These are of brushless type. So, and these are of brushless type. Then one more thing is, since these things are light, the rotor is light, you are able to achieve the back drivability of the motor. So you might have seen, if there is a simple brush DC motor, you can just rotate it in the forward direction. But if there is a brushless DC motor, you can also rotate it in the backward direction. You have the feature of back drivability, and that is there because this is light. This is light. You can brake it at a particular speed. Excuse me. Let's say your motor is running at a speed of 1500 rpm. Okay, and then you suddenly want to switch the polarity and let it move in the opposite direction. Let's say we want to do that. Now if that has to be done, what we would choose? The motor should not have high inertia. If it has high inertia, it won't be able to stop and move in the opposite direction, right? So that is one of the problems why we don't prefer brush DC motors in industries and we go for brushless DC motor. Anyway, that was off the track and we'll have multiple questions on that. Before that, an actuator that can be operated in open loop is a pneumatic artificial muscle, is a brush DC motor, is a brushless DC motor, or a stepper motor. So there's a reason for it. Why I will say that. So I'll tell you the answer. The answer for this is stepper motor. And why? So let's write the answer to this question. A stepper motor, it is designed in that way that it would work in open loop. Okay. Designed. I would request you to please write everything that I am writing, and also because these would help you actually strengthen the concepts or take screenshots or whatever is favorable. That I don't mind that. System. Why it is designed to work in an open loop system? Because there are discrete steps. It has. So as I showed, so not here. But yeah, there are discrete steps. Discrete steps means you have the step here. Okay. And then you are supposed to follow these steps only. You cannot land anywhere in between these. So if you have the poles present over here, your pole should align with any one of the magnet and it cannot be in anywhere in between. So whatever voltage is applied, you have to move there unless you want to do micro stepping. Micro stepping is another thing where you like apply some multiples of voltages also. But in a general stepper motor, where there is no micro stepping, you are bound to reach to a particular permanent magnet and be there. So it works in steps. If it says that the voltage applied is kind of that you would just surpass two poles, you will move in steps till there only and you won't move any forward. So a stepper motor is designed to work in an open loop system because it moves in discrete steps. Okay, and it does not require any feedback. Okay. Given a command, it moves a fixed amount. Okay. Okay. Making feed. I hope you understand what is the meaning of feedback. Making feedback unnecessary unless some accuracy correction is required. Let's ignore that and say that we don't need a feedback because we just have the steps and we can reach the particular magnet. The other options that we have here are pneumatic artificial muscle. So, in this case, in pneumatic artificial muscle, what happens? In pneumatic artificial muscle, we use pressure control. Okay. These pressure control things often need feedback. Feedback to ensure precise force. Okay. Or any position regulation. So, okay, if you say that we can go with open loop also, where we are giving some input and getting some output, and there is no feedback for error correction also, but that is not reliable in this case because of the non-linear nature. So, non-linear nature of air compression, sorry, due to this uh, open loop operation is unreliable. Okay. Okay. Then the option is for brushed DC motor. What happens in brushed DC motor? They generally require feedback. Is it not visible? Yeah, I'm writing on the screen. Can you confirm if the things are visible? The pneumatic artificial muscle and brushed DC motor part? Okay, for Bindu it's not visible. Sanjana, can you confirm if you are able to see the screen? No, I can't hear you. Hi Sanjana, can you hear me? It's not visible. Okay. I don't know, I'll present once more. Just wait. Now is my screen visible? I'm not able to hear Sanjana's voice as well. Okay. Okay, let me know again if you face any problem. Uh, okay. So, yeah. So, just to reiterate, in pneumatic artificial muscles, the actuators require pressure control, which often leads to which often needs feedback because we have to sense the force precisely, or we want to achieve precise position regulation. So, due to the nonlinear nature of air compression, open loop operation is unreliable. Okay, and for brushed DC motor, feedback for speed and position accuracy is required. Okay, so if you don't have this feedback or the closed loop control, I hope you're aware of open loop and closed loop control. Open loop in which you do not have any error correction. In closed loop control, you basically take the output feedback from the sensor, you match it with the reference or the desired value that you want, find out the error and use some controller to correct it. Okay. So for brush DC motor, open loop control can lead to variations due to load changes, making them unsuitable, right? Now, for brushless DC motor, BLDC motors rely on electronic commutation, as I said here. Right. They rely on electronic commutation, which often incorporates Hall effect sensors or encoders for proper operation, making them fundamentally closed loop devices. They are not open loop devices. Okay. So, the stepper motor is the correct answer because it can execute position control in an open loop system without requiring feedback. All right. I lost my connection. Okay. I hope I am clearly audible and my screen is visible. So I am currently switching to question number 2. Please let me know if you are able to see this. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So for the next question, uh, the question asks, in a brushless DC motor, the rotor is made up of what? So we discussed this here, right? This is the brushless DC motor, and in this, these are the magnets. Okay. So what happens? In a brushless DC motor, the rotor is made up of coils, strip magnets, electromagnets, or none of the above. So a BLDC motor has a permanent magnet rotor, permanent magnet rotor, and which typically consists of strip magnets, arranged around the circumference, the rotor's circumference. Okay. So the stator contains the coils that create a rotating magnetic field to drive the rotor, right? What is the stator? This is your rotor, this is your stator. Stator is something which remains stationary, rotor is something which keeps rotating. Okay, so uh, yeah, the stator contains coils that create the magnetic field to drive the rotor. Okay, I hope this is clear. So the answer is not coils, because in BLDC motor the stator contains the coil. So this is present in the stator that generate the electromagnetic field, not the rotor. The rotor is made up of permanent magnets and not coils. Electromagnets is also not correct, because the rotor of a BLDC motor does not use electromagnets, it uses permanent magnets. Electromagnets actually require an external power source, right, to maintain their external field, which is not the case in BLDC motors. And none of the above is definitely not correct, because strip magnets is the correct answer. Okay, are this clear? So strip magnet is the correct choice. Okay, let's move to the next question. My screen should change to question number 3. I hope it is working well. Okay, so brushed DC motors are used in industrial robotics application, are not used in industrial robotics application, because so what happens with brushed DC motor? The most problematic thing with it is the brushes wear out. You cannot have them in industry, right? You cannot install new motors again and again. Yeah. If they are having uh, brush, they are using carbon brushes for commutation, it is really a problem. So what happens? Brushed DC motors use physical carbon brushes to transfer electrical energy to the rotor through a commutator. Okay, these brushes experience mechanical wear and tear, leading to reduced lifespan and higher maintenance cost. Okay, so uh, just a second, you have written brushless DC motors use mechanical commutator. Which type? No, brushless DC motors do not use mechanical commutator. We have electronic commutation happening over there. It's completely based on a detection from Hall effect sensor. It does not use mechanical commutator. That's the plus point we have from BLDC motors. Okay, is there something else you want to ask? Which motor uses thin magnets? I'm not sure about it. I don't know, what are the options you have?
Ma'am, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
Ma'am, the question is the main difference between a brush type DC motor and a brushless DC motor is the rotor of brush type DC motor is made of thin magnet, rotor of brush type is made of thin magnet, and other two options are wrong, I think so. A brush type DC motor implements commutation through a software, it is wrong, and brushless DC motor has a mechanical commutator, it is also wrong. So the difference might come in first two options. The rotor of a brushless DC motor is made of thin magnets, or rotor of a brush type DC motor is made of thin magnets.
I'm not sure about the answer actually for this question. I think it should be BLDC because we want to have lightweight on the rotor, but let me confirm. I'll tell you. Internet is not working properly, but as of now, from the I think it should be BLDC motors because we want to lighten the weight of the rotor. So I think that should be the correct answer for thin magnets. But yeah, I think we should clarify it. Yeah. Brushless DC motors often use thin, powerful magnets, while brushed DC motors typically use larger, less powerful magnets. So, yeah, it's about BLDC only. Because we want to achieve high efficiency and performance. So, the cost is also really high for BLDC motors. So, we want to like have thin materials only. So, that is why. That's all the reason. Okay. So, let's complete this question. Okay, so yeah, uh, reduced lifespan and high maintenance costs. So in industrial robots, reliability and durability are major concern. So if we have this concern, we can't go with a motor which has the brushes wearing out always. But let's go through the other options as well. The first option says that a control is difficult. So control is difficult. I mean, brush DC motors have very simple speed and torque control by just using the voltage variations and PWM. So they are actually easier to control than brushless motors. So that is definitely not the correct option. Then the other option is low torque. Brush DC motors can generate high torque. It's not that it is always going to be low torque. So the torque is never an issue, but wear and tear and efficiency is the issue. Then the next option we have is low speed. So brush DC motors can achieve high speeds. They suffer from frictional losses because of the carbon brushes present over there. But speed is not the primary reason for the reduced use in industrial robotics. We don't use them because of this brushes wearing out only. That is why this is the correct answer. Okay. Okay. Let's move to the next question. In an ultrasonic motor, uh, Do you remember what is ultrasonic motor? Any idea? Okay. Tell you. Ultrasonic motor operates by using high frequency ultrasonic vibrations to induce motion. Okay. So the rotor in an ultrasonic rotor is made up of piezoelectric materials. I'll write USM is made up of piezoelectric materials. So when these materials are subjected to electrical field, they undergo mechanical deformation or vibration is the thing that comes into effect. Okay, this actually drives the rotors, so the rotors movement basically. Okay, so these piezoelectric materials are responsible to drive the rotor. So they undergo mechanical deformation or vibration when they are subjected to some electrical field. So this is the principle on which ultrasonic motor works. The other options that we have are magnetic material, where magnetic materials are used in traditional motors, right? But ultrasonic motors do not rely on this magnetic fields for operation. They rather use mechanical deformation of piezoelectric materials to generate the motion. Okay, so this is not the correct option. The second option is IPMC. What is IPMC? Your IPMC is ionic polymer metal composite. So this basically works on the polarization of charge. So let's say you polarizes charge in such a way that all the charges accumulate over here, and then this bends in this direction. So the accumulation of charges on one side actually increases the pressure, and then you can get a bending shape, and then you can move it to the next step. So these are smart actuators basically. So IPMCs are type of actuator based on polymers that change shape under an electric field. They are not used in ultrasonic motors because they ultrasonic motors का working फंडा ये है that it depends on piezoelectric materials. The next option we have is solar cell. So solar cells are used to convert light to electrical energy, right? And they are not involved in the operation of ultrasonic motors. These motors are based on this mechanical deformation of piezoelectric materials and not solar energy. Hence, this is the correct answer. Okay, that is why the rotor of an ultrasonic motor is made up of piezoelectric material, which enables the motor to work through high frequency vibrations. All right, I hope this question is clear. Okay, if it is, then let's move to the next question. The dynamic forces or torque in a robot manipulator act on the control system as a stable input, control input, disturbance, or none of the above. Dynamic forces and torque means any external force being applied at any point of time. In a robot manipulator that acts on, how does it act on the control system? Means, does it Is it a stable input, or it acts as some control input that is coming out from some controller, or is it a disturbance? So first of all, the primary question is, how do these dynamic forces and torques arise? That is one of the important questions. And how do they arise? They arise due to inertia, Coriolis forces, or Coriolis effect, I would say, friction, and external disturbances. Okay. And okay, external disturbances could be what? Sudden changes in load. Okay, so these forces are actually unpredictable. These forces are unpredictable and they can affect systems stability. So they can be modeled as disturbance. They can be seen as disturbances in the control system. All right. The other options are stable input. So dynamic forces and torques are not stable, right? They vary with motion, speed, and any external factor, making them disturbances rather than stable input. So this is definitely wrong. Control inputs are deliberate commands sent to the actuators. So if you remember, you have a controller present over here, okay, and then you have the process here. Process could be any plant, your robot, anything. You have some desire, you have some output. We name it to be actual output. Then you have this being sensed through a sensor. Then before controller you have error, you have this to be reference or desired output. You have the difference coming out from the things that is being sensed from the sensor, and then you're calculating the error and passing it to the controller. It could be PID controller, it can be some nonlinear controller, whatever it is. So control inputs are the commands. If this is a process, then I would say this is a motor, because ultimately we are sending the commands from motors only. So whatever goes from here is your control input to the plant. So control inputs are deliberate commands sent to the actuators to move the robots. Dynamic forces torques are unwanted effects, not intentional control signals. Therefore, this is the wrong answer. None of the above is not correct because we model it as a disturbance. Alright. So in robotic manipulators, dynamic forces and torques are considered disturbances because they affect the desired motion and need to be compensated for in advanced control algorithms. So they affect the desired motion because they act as disturbances. Okay, and we need to compensate for them. That is why. So I hope this question is clear. Any questions in this question? If not, we'll proceed to the next question. The gains of a PD controller are chosen such that the system is critically damped, over damped, under damped, or unstable. Okay. So how are the gains of PD controller chosen? It is covered, well covered in the lecture, but before that, what is a PD controller? Can you tell me what is a PD controller? Because this will form the very basic of the complete control system, independent joint control, everything. And control is a very important aspect in robotics. So what is a PD controller? Or You can answer a general PID controller. What is a PID controller? Any idea on this? I mean, tell me if you know something. If you don't know, then
The
I'll tell you.
controller
Hmm.
The controller input will be proportional, will be having three terms. One will be proportional to the error signal, the other will be proportional to the derivative of the error signal, and the third one will be proportional to the integral of the error signal.
Very good. And how
So
to?
the
Yeah, yeah. Continue.
and this derivative term or the derivative gain can be adjusted so that the oscillations in the systems can be avoided, whereas the integral term contributes to reduction in the steady state error of the system.
Good. And proportional?
Proportional, it will be proportional to the error signal. We can adjust the magnitude,
Yeah. So basically, you can
like
decide
the
how fast you want to reach the steady state.
want the response. Yes.
So if you want to have a reduction in rise time, you can go by adjusting Kp. If you want no steady state error, go with Ki. And if you don't want to have oscillations in the system, it should be a proper settling response and go for Kd. So yeah, you were very right in your answers. So, so in this case, the gains of a PD controller are chosen such as a system is this is our question. So, okay, so let's talk about PD controller. So it is basically used to improve the stability and response speed by and how we are improving that by adjusting the proportional and derivative gain Kp and Kd. So the goal of tuning these gains is often to achieve a critically damped system which ensures fast response without oscillations. Because what happens if let's say uh, if this is my value that I want to achieve, if I go for an underdamped system, then how would my response look like? It would be somewhat of this kind. If it is, let's assume it to be a second order system. I'll erase this first. Yeah. It would move, it would overshoot, it would come down, and then over the time it would settle. Now it can settle in 2% or 5% range, whatever it is. If you take the 2% range into account, then it is going to be this within 2% criteria or 5% criteria, whatever it is. So this is under damped. Okay. So what is happening with this? What are we um, what are we losing here? So we are getting oscillations. We are having maximum peak. For example, you can take the example of slamming of a door. So if it is under damped, the door will move out, come back, move out, come back, and then settle. So the oscillations will be there, right? You won't be just able to, without a damper, you won't be able to reach the steady state value that, okay, in one go my door should be closed. You'll have the peak, overshoot and if you want the things to happen quickly, so you'll have more overshoot. Okay, so this leads to oscillations. Now let's talk about underdamped system. What happens? It reaches the value, but it is very, very, very slow to reach. And so this is overdamped. It takes a very large amount of time to reach the steady state value. But if we go with critically damped system, what would happen? Critically damped system would be relatively faster to reach and would not have oscillations either. You won't be oscillating. Okay. You won't be oscillating and then it won't be even too slow. So what we actually want, we want fast response, no oscillations. These are our primary concern in robotics because We don't want the robot to reach the desired position taking a lot of time. We don't want a lot of oscillation in our system as well. So critically damped system helps here. Okay. So we are using PD controller over here. KP increases the system response speed but can cause oscillations. Okay, let me write this. Uh, increases system response speed but can come up with oscillations. Okay. And what does KD do? It reduces the overshoot and improves damping. Okay. So when properly tuned, a PD controller achieves critical damping, meaning the system reaches its final value as quickly as possible without overshooting. That is what we want for the robot. Okay. We can't afford overshoot maximum number of times in the robot. So yeah, that is a problem. So okay, if we go for this overdamped system, what would happen? If the KD is too high, if we want to reduce the number of oscillations, if we don't want the system to overshoot, for that if we keep the KD to be too high, the system becomes overdamped, meaning it responds slowly and takes longer to reach the desired value, right? If we go with underdamped system, KP would be high and KD would be low. The system is underdamped, which leads to oscillations before settling. Okay. Now, no, we don't want to make the system unstable anyway, right? Because a PD controller generally improves stability. Instability occurs if KP is too high or KD is too low. But a well-tuned PD controller prevents instability. So, the correct option is critically damped. All right. I hope this is clear. Okay. Let's move to the next question. Consider a mass spring damper based position regulator problem with M is equal to B is equal to K is equal to 1. For the position gain Kp, the system is critically damped. Find the corresponding value of derivative gain Kv. Okay. So the given problem is a spring mass damper system with a PD controller. We need to find the derivative gain Kv that ensures critical damping. That is all we want to do. So we need to find the derivative gain Kv that ensures critical damping. Okay. So how does a standard second order system look like for mass spring damper system with PD control? Okay, let me write this. Without any control, what happens? Mx double dot plus Bx dot plus K is equal to 0, right? This is the equation, the differential equation for mass spring damper system without any kind of control being applied there. Now let's go with PD control. What happens? It remains the same, but on the other side we add a term proportional to, I think I left x here, yeah, with respect kpx and then kv x dot. Okay, this is what we do. So what happens? Mx double dot plus B plus KB x dot plus K plus KP x is equal to 0. This is the differential equation with PD control. It's given that M is equal to 1, B is equal to 1 and K is equal to 1 and KP is equal to 8, right? So we can simplify this equation as the following. X double dot plus 1 plus KB x dot plus 1 plus 8 x is equal to 0. Here we go. X double dot plus 1 plus KB x dot plus 9x is equal to 0, right? So what is this? Can you identify this equation? What is the order of this equation? And
Two.
yeah, and if required, can we compare it with a characteristic equation? This is your differential equation, right? How does or not characteristic equation, how does a general second order differential equation look like in terms of, I would say, zeta and omega, because that is what we are concerned. We'll be concerned in frequency, we'll be concerned in damping, right? So can you?
S square plus 2 zeta omega ns plus omega n square equal to 0.
Very good. Very good. So I'm not taking it to S domain. I'm not taking the Laplace of it. I'm keeping it in this time domain only. So I'll write 2 zeta omega n x dot plus omega n square x is equal to 0. Where your natural frequency is given by omega n, and omega n in our case is under root 9, which is 3 radian per second. Then critical damping condition, let's apply that. So it is 2 zeta omega n should be equal to 1 plus kV. Right? And for critical damping, your zeta should be equal to 1. Okay. So 2 into 1 into 3 is equal to 1 plus kV. From here, just a second, I'm not able. Yeah. From here you can write 6 is equal to 1 plus kV. So kV is equal to 5. Right? So 5 is the correct option. I hope this question is clear.
Clear, ma'am.
Okay. Okay. So other options were also there, right? It said kV is equal to 0. So if kV is equal to 0, then 1 plus kV is equal to 1, which does not satisfy the critical damping condition. The other option is 2. If kV is 2, then 1 plus kV is 3, which again results in underdamping. If kV is 8, then 1 plus kV is 9, which results in overdamping. So these three options do not satisfy the condition for critical damping. Okay. Using using control law partitioning, a mass spring and damper based system can be converted into a unit mass system. For the control of a unit mass system using a PD controller, the value of Kp is 16. Find the value of Kb for the system to be critically damped. So Let's write the equation again with PD controller. Mx double dot plus B plus KV x dot plus K plus KP x is equal to 0. Since the problem states that it is a unit mass system, we take mass to be equal to 1. And then we write x double dot plus B plus KV x dot plus K plus KP x is equal to 0. What is given to us? KP is equal to 16. It is unit mass system. Okay. So we assume M is equal to 1, K is equal to 0, B is equal to 0. Because we don't want to assume any inherent damping. So the equation actually reduces to x double dot plus KV x dot plus 16x is equal to 0. If you compare this to 2 zeta omega n x dot plus omega n square x is equal to 0, from here you can find natural frequency omega n to be equal to under root kp, which is under root 16, which is equal to 4. Critical damping zeta is equal to 1 and 2 zeta omega n is equal to kV. So 2 into 1 into 4 is equal to kV. So your kV is equal to 8. Okay. Because we don't have any value of B and K. So we are going to take it to be 0 only. Okay. And then here we get kV is equal to 8. Now you can cross check if you have got the correct answer or not. So let's say we take kV is equal to 0 from the first option. Then there is no damping. So it results in underdamped oscillatory behavior. If kV is equal to 5, then the damping is less than critical, leading to underdamping. If kV is 10, then it is overdamped, meaning it will be slower in reaching equilibrium. So yeah, your correct answer is 8 for critical damping. Okay. Let's move to the next question. So when a robot picks up and drops an object, the controller gain does not need to be changed as the effect on the link inertia is minimal, because inertia is divided by the gear ratio. Inertia is an invariant quantity. Inertia is multiplied by the gear ratio. Inertia is divided by the square of the gear ratio. Okay, so in robotic systems, gear ratios play a crucial role in determining reflected inertia of the motor. So what is reflected inertia? Reflected inertia of the motor, let's call it to be J effective, and actual inertia, which is J load. So the relation between this reflected inertia and the actual inertia is given by J effective is equal to J load upon N square, where N is the gear ratio. Okay. What does this mean? This means that higher gear ratios significantly reduce the reflected inertia on the motor side. Okay, so what happens as a result, when the robot drops and picks up and drops an object, what happens? The actual load inertia changes, right? The load is actually changing. But due to this gear ratio squaring effect, the effect or the impact on the effective inertia at the actuator is minimal, right? The impact on the effective inertia at the actuator is minimal, reducing the need for controller gain adjustments. Okay, so the first option says inertia is divided by gear ratio. It is incorrect because inertia is actually divided by the square of the gear ratio and not just n. Okay, inertia is an invariant quantity. It is incorrect because inertia changes when an object is picked up or dropped. It is not an invariant property. So that is wrong. Inertia is not invariant in our case. Then the other option is inertia is multiplied by the gear ratio. Incorrect because inertia is reduced due to the gear ratio and it is not increased. The correct option is inertia is divided by the square of the gear ratio because of this relation. Okay, that is why we don't need to change the controller gains when it is being picked and dropped. I hope this is clear. Let's move to the next question. If a this is the last question. Okay. If a system is asymptotically stable and it is subjected to a disturbance, then it will return near the origin, it will return to the origin, it will not return, or it will go far from the origin. So, what is asymptotically stable? A system is asymptotically stable if after a disturbance it not only returns to equilibrium but also tends towards origin over time. Okay, so in mathematical terms how it can be written? Xt, the state, system state, xt tends to 0 as t tends to infinity. Your states converge to 0 as t tends to infinity, then it is asymptotically stable. I'll write just AS. Okay, this means that any deviation from the equilibrium due to any kind of disturbance will eventually vanish and the system will return to its original steady state position or the origin. Okay, so first option says that it will return near the origin. So it describes a Lyapunov stability where the system remains bounded but may not necessarily converge to the origin. Asymptotic stability ensures convergence to the origin, not just near it. Then the other is it will not return. This would describe an unstable system, right? Because in an asymptotically stable system, disturbances do not cause permanent deviation. If it is going away from the origin, then it is going to be unstable. Then the other is it will go far from the origin. So this happens in an unstable system where the disturbances grow over the time. So an asymptotically stable system does the opposite. It suppresses the disturbances that happens over the time. So yeah, your correct option is it will return to the origin. Okay. Near the origin is something that we get from Lyapunov stability. That is a part of nonlinear control. So yeah, I hope all of these things are clear. If it is, then yeah, you can read the following question. I'm trying to open MATLAB online, but I am facing some problem in opening this. But you can go through the question. I'll share. And think of how we would proceed given the following question. What could be the way of execution? Okay, I'm just trying to figure out what to do. But anyway, it's the question says design a PID controller for a 2R robotic manipulator or a two-link planar robot arm, right? To track a desired trajectory. The system dynamics are modeled using standard robot equation of motion, and the control goal is to ensure that manipulator tracks a given reference trajectory for its two joints angle. So let's say I want theta 1 to be pi by 6, theta 2 to be pi by 4. Okay. So what I want is I am at rest position currently, and I want my PID controller to work on both the joints in such a way that I am able to achieve the following joint configuration. So that is all I want with this code. So how would one proceed if needed? Uh, read these. I'll just put the things in a Word file and then show you. Okay. So the first thing that we'll do is we will define the system parameters. It is basically the initialization of mass, length, and gravity parameters of the 2R manipulator, right? Then we'll define the PID controller gains, which is basically Kp, Ki, and Kd. We'll define all of them. Then what we'll do, we'll specify the desired joint trajectories, the target joint angles basically, which I said to be pi by 6 and pi by 4. Then we'll initialize the states, the initial joint angles, velocities, and integral error terms, etc. Then we'll simulate the system using ODE45. So ODE45 is used to simulate the system here. We plot the results, and we also define a dynamic function which basically computes M matrix, C matrix, G matrix, implements the PID control, and solves for joint accelerations. Okay. So what is the equation of motion for a 2R manipulator? So it is m theta double dot, where inertia matrix is a function of theta. Then there is a Coriolis matrix, which is a function of theta and theta dot, and it is multiplied with theta dot. Then there is a gravity vector, which is a function of theta, but it is equal to torque, right? So m theta is a mass inertia matrix, C is Coriolis and centripetal matrix, G is the gravity vector, T is the torque applied by the motors, and theta represents the joint angles, right? For a 2R manipulator, the M matrix is given by this, C matrix is given by this, G matrix is given by this. I would like if you can derive it, but yeah, I'll show you how these are coming. But for now, think that this is the matrix that you are going to enter in MATLAB. Okay, I'll tell you how we are deriving these. So these are being derived using Euler-Lagrange's method. Okay, or energy based method that we have. After that, we'll be applying the PID control law, where the error would for each joint would be theta desired minus theta t. This would basically be an error. Theta d is the desired trajectory, theta t is the current joint angle. Then we find this, as you said, we apply PID controller where p is applied to the error, ki to the integral of the error, and kd to the derivative of the error. So these are the gains, proportional, integral, and the derivative gain. Okay. By substituting this controller over here, your torque place, you replace it with this, your controller. So this equation basically governs how a robot arm follows the desired trajectory. So this is what we are going to implement. This is the crux of the entire code. Okay. Now, what is a trajectory? I think I wrote it in opposite manner here. This is 4, this is 6. Okay, what is a trajectory? The trajectory is the desired motion of a robot's joint over the time. It defines how the end effector should move in space. So it can be point-to-point motion, or it can be continuous path tracking, right? Both of these. So for point-to-point motion, the robot moves from an initial angle to a desired angle smoothly. Okay. For continuous path tracking, the robot follows a predefined path. Example is circular or a linear motion. So in this problem, the desired trajectory is theta 1 is equal to pi by 4, theta 2 desired is equal to pi by 6. So joint 1 should move to 45 degrees, joint 2 should move to 30 degrees. That is all we want. So the PID controller adjusts the torques to ensure that robot follows this trajectory smoothly without any oscillation. Okay. So if Kp is very high, the system reaches the desired position faster but may overshoot. If Kd is high, the system dampens the oscillation but slows down. If Ki is high, the system compensates for steady state error but may become unstable, right? So the final outcome should be that the robot is reaching towards these target angles. The controller ensures smooth tracking without excessive overshoot, and the trajectory is tracked efficiently with minimum error. That is all we want. Now, what we can conclude from this exercise is the PID controller computes torque to drive the 2R arm to the desired angles, right? To theta 1 desired is equal to pi by 4 and theta 2 be equal to pi by 6. The trajectory refers to smooth motion of angles theta 1 and theta 2 over the time, and the control law ensures accurate and stable tracking of the trajectory. Okay, so this is how PID controllers help in robotic arm motion control. Okay, now how we will proceed with it? How did we get everything? So we'll first define the parameters of the 2-arm manipulator, where theta 1 is the joint angle of the link 1, theta 2 is the joint angle to the link of the link 2. Okay, we are defining theta 2 to be relative to theta 1, not relative to base. Okay, now the physical parameters are M, L, inertia matrices and G. All of these are physical parameters which we already defined. Motion of center of mass. You know very well, we have been seeing this forever. The center of mass of link 1 lies at L1. So if you do remember the diagram, it is this way. And yeah, this is theta 1 with the base, this is theta 2, and then the position of this center of mass is L1 by 2 cos theta, given this is L1, L2, L1 by 2 cos theta. Y for this is L1 by 2 sin theta. Similarly, for the second second link, the center of mass position is L1 cos theta 1 plus L2 by 2 sin theta 1, right? Sorry, cos theta 1 plus theta 2, because this is the complete angle. Similarly, this goes for link 2. I hope this is already clear. I am not going through all of them in detail, because this is just the position of center of mass. Then what we want to do, we want to define the kinetic energy, because we are going through Euler-Lagrange's approach. Okay, the total kinetic energy is given by half m1 vc1 square plus the rotational kinetic energy is half I1 theta 1 dot square, half I omega square essentially. For the second link also, it is the translational kinetic energy and the rotational kinetic energy, right? So from here you can see that we need the values of Vc1 and theta 1 dot. We need all of them. So for Vc1, what you can do, you have already got Xc1, right? You already got Yc1. Differentiate it to get the velocity of center of mass for link 1, center of mass for link 2, under root and square. So when you get the velocities of both the links, what you can do, you can just place it over here. So torque is equal to this complete quantity. From here, you can segregate the inertia matrix. Okay. Then you can also find the Coriolis matrix and you can find the gravity matrix. So it is, all of them is coming from the total kinetic energy that you found. Now, the final expression would give you this mass and Coriolis centripetal matrix and gravity vector that we will be directly using. Yeah. I'm switching the screen. Just. Should change it to Microsoft Edge. No. Okay, I'll change it to Word. Then yeah. So I'm not able to access MATLAB right now. So what I've done, I've got all the codes copied over here, and that is what I'm showing you. So yeah, here all the parameters are defined, and here as of now KPKI and KD is defined. Then it is defined. Then after that we are defining desired theta 1 and theta 2. What are the initial that we are defining? Then after that we are just simulating the system and plotting the result. The main things actually come here. Yeah, function to get the manipulator dynamics. This is the most important thing, and that is what we are going to call. So it basically takes into account what is the desired theta angle, with time, with what is the correct current position, and then kpki, kt, m1, m2, l1, l2, g. Then what we do? We extract the joint angles, joint velocities, and integral of the error, compute the errors. This is the PID control law, which says that torque is equal to Kp into error, Ki into error integral plus Kt into error derivative. We we write the mass matrix as we saw right now, the Coriolis matrix as well, and then the gravity vector as well. Then what we do? We just write theta d. So it is coming from that equation. X double dot is equal to torque minus c into uh, x dot minus g upon it would not be upon m, it would be inverse, right? So m inverse is being multiplied. I hope you get it. So you have the equation, right? Mx I cannot even show you this as of now. So you remember that equation, right? M theta double dot plus C theta dot plus G is equal to torque. It is the same thing. Just multiply with M by M inverse on both the sides. So M inverse on the left side would actually lead to identity matrix, and only the thing that would remain would be theta double dot. On the right side, M inverse will be multiplied by tau minus C into theta dot minus g. So that is only the thing here. From here we calculate what is theta double dot. Then we update the integral error. Then we also return the derivatives, and that is all that is plotted. So from here, for here you can see the joint angles theta 1 and theta 2. So we wanted theta 1 to be equal to pi by 4. So calculate 3.14 upon 4. So this blue line basically settles to that value of pi by 4. Okay. The red line, we wanted it to be pi by 6. That is also 3.14 by 6, and it settles to that value approximately. And it is very smooth tracking. You see, there is no overshoot over the desired value that we want. Except for the blue case, it is a bit of overshoot, but not so much. So yeah, we are able to achieve the joint angles as we wanted. And the joint velocities are approximately 0. I mean, so yeah, I mean, you don't have much variation in the velocity, but you are able to achieve the joint angles, and joint velocities were there. There were values in the beginning, but later they went to 0 because you are able to track the value, and you don't need any velocity there. Okay. So okay, you had written disturbance and critically timed. Okay. So that's all for today. In the next class, we'll be having other topics that we'll be covering. I think, just a minute. In the next class, okay, we are going to have stability and PD and PID control of a single joint. So I would say that look through the stability concepts from control system point of view on PD and PID control, and for stability, what happens if poles lie in the right of the S-plane, left half of the S-plane, then when is the system stable, what is beaver stability. Look into all those concepts, because that is what we are going to deal with in the next class. And yeah, next class will be held on Monday itself. Not coming Monday, not on 17th March, because that is a class we preponed. So it's not going to happen on 17th March, but it is whatever is the next Monday, it will be happening on that day. Okay, so we stick with Monday again. Okay, if there are any questions, then we can take, else yeah, from my side it's done.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, I guess there are no more questions. So okay, see you next Monday. Bye bye.